My uncle confessed his biggest secret before he died. I saw him there, lying in bed, his gaze lost, with death breathing down his neck. Everyone in the family pretended to be sad, but I knew the truth, they were just waiting for his last breath to divide his fortune. But in his final moments, he called me to his side. His voice was weak, but his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Don't tell them anything. The will they're all waiting for is fake. At that moment, I realized my life was about to change forever. My name is Alexander Churchill, and I come from a family that once had everything, and lost it all. My great-grandfather, Henry Churchill, was the illegitimate son of an English aristocrat, but that didn't stop him from building an empire in America. However, the wealth didn't last long. My grandfather and his descendants, including my father, Richard Churchill, squandered everything on luxuries, gambling, and bad investments. Everyone, except one. My uncle, Edmund Churchill, my father's older brother, not only managed to preserve what little was left of the family fortune, but he multiplied it until he became a true millionaire. Owner of companies, properties, and connections with powerful people, he was always the untouchable of the family. The strange thing was that he never married or had children, which made him the obsession of all my relatives. Because, to them, his inheritance was a prize waiting to be claimed. Unlike the rest of my family, I never saw my uncle Edmund Churchill as just a pile of money. Since I was a child, he was more than just a distant relative, he was a mentor, an example of discipline and success. While the others only visited him when they needed favors, I genuinely spent time with him. We talked about history, business, and the importance of not depending on anyone. And in gratitude for my sincere companionship, he opened many doors for me. Thanks to his help, I got my first job as an accounting assistant in one of his companies. It wasn't a gift, I had to work hard, but he was the one who gave me the opportunity. He also taught me how to fish and introduced me to tennis, a sport we used to practice on weekends. But while I enjoyed his company, my family only saw him as an inheritance waiting to be collected. Edmund was diabetic, and his health was starting to decline. It wasn't uncommon to hear my uncles or even my own father make comments like, "Poor Edmund, I don't think he'll last much longer. When he passes away, we'll have to decide what to do with his properties." There was no sadness or concern in their voices. Only greed. I, on the other hand, saw him as a tired man. A man who had given everything, yet in his final years seemed lonelier than ever. My father, Richard Churchill, was never a businessman like my uncle. While Edmund had built an empire, my father had done the opposite, he had spent it all. He always believed the family fortune was his by right. He recklessly went into debt, taking out loans to live a life he couldn't afford, buying luxury cars, making senseless investments, and throwing extravagant parties to keep up the illusion that we were still an aristocratic family. But it was all based on a single assumption, that Uncle Edmund would die before him, and that the inheritance would save him from ruin. The worst part? He wasn't the only one. My other uncles and cousins were exactly the same. Each of them had a story of failures and debts that, one way or another, depended on the inevitable death of the family patriarch. And then, Edmund fell gravely ill. Diabetes had weakened him for years, but in the past few months, everything had worsened. He lost weight, his skin looked pale, and his energy was fading. An infection in one of his legs forced him to be hospitalized in an emergency. What shocked me the most wasn't his illness, but my family's reaction. No one bothered to visit him. Not my father, not my uncles, not my cousins. Not even his younger sister, who used to say he was her favorite brother. To them, Edmund was already dead, and the only thing that mattered was what would happen next. I was the only one who stayed by his side. I spent hours in his hospital room, keeping him company, talking to him when he could barely respond. Sometimes he would fall asleep in the middle of a conversation, other times, he would wake up with glassy eyes, looking at me with something I can only describe as sorrow. It was on one of those nights, when the hospital was completely silent and only he and I remained in the room, that he asked me to come closer. "I have to tell you something before it's too late." His voice was weak, but his eyes were filled with something I had never seen in him before, urgency. I had no idea that he was about to reveal something that would change my life forever. With difficulty, my Uncle Edmund motioned for me to lean in closer. His breathing was labored, and the sound of the machines filled the silence of the room. "I've made many mistakes, but there's one thing I did right." I looked at him, waiting, my heart pounding in my throat. "I changed my will. I cut everyone out." It took me a few seconds to process his words. "What do you mean, everyone?" I asked quietly. He smiled weakly. "Including your father. All of them. They don't deserve anything." I was in shock. My Uncle Edmund was telling me that, in a matter of days, the entire family would find out they wouldn't receive a single cent of his fortune. "You were the only one who was there for me. The only one who treated me like a person, not like an ATM." I tried to say something, but no words came out. "It's all yours, and when they find out, well, be ready for the worst." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. That very night, my Uncle Edmund passed away. The funeral was a pathetic spectacle. Almost no one in the family shed a tear. My Aunt Anne and my mother didn't even stay until the end of the ceremony. They only came to be seen by the important people attending. They spoke as if they were already rich, as if the inheritance was already in their hands. My father, on the other hand, seemed calm. Because he was convinced that he would inherit everything. No one suspected what was about to happen. A week later, the day of the will reading arrived. We gathered at my uncle's house, in his grand meeting hall. The lawyer sat in front of everyone, a stack of documents in hand, and looked at the family with a serious expression. I could only think of one thing: when he finished reading, all hell would break loose. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Edmund Churchill, in full possession of my faculties, declare this to be my last will and testament." The first lines were just the usual formalities. Everyone in the room remained calm, their faces filled with absurd confidence. They believed they already owned a fortune they had never worked for. Until the important part came. "And after much reflection, I have decided to remove all my relatives from this will." The silence in the room was like a whip crack. Except for my nephew, Alexander Churchill. Hell broke loose. "What?" My father stood up so fast that his chair crashed to the floor. My Aunt Anne clutched her chest as if she were having a heart attack. My stepmother's eyes widened, unable to process what she had just heard. The lawyer ignored the uproar and continued reading. "I leave to Alexander all my properties and assets, including the New York mansion, a massive estate with an English colonial style, surrounded by endless gardens and featuring a centuries-old wine cellar. Old Oak Estate, a 600-hectare property with a vineyard, purebred horses, and a stone country house dating back to the 19th century. The Grand Windsor Hotel, a luxurious boutique hotel in the city center, frequented by diplomats and businesspeople. Winston Steel Factory, founded by my great-grandfather, one of the last family-owned industries still in operation. Blackwood Ranch, a hunting estate in the mountains, with a wooden cabin, private lakes, and a winter refuge. Ravenshore Island, yes, a private island. Small, but with a cabin and a dock for yachts. My family couldn't believe what they were hearing. And that was only the beginning. Additionally, I leave the following investments and shares in their entirety. 35% of the Atlantic Shipping Company. 20% of an emerald mine in South America. 15% of a private bank in Switzerland. The murmurs grew into full-blown shouting. But the final blow came when the lawyer read the automobiles. Regarding my collection of classic cars, I leave Alexander the following models. A 1954 Rolls-Royce Phantom 4. A 1953 Bentley R-Type Continental. A 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. A 1936 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic. A 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. My father slammed his fist on the table. This is a damn joke. My aunt screamed. There must be some mistake. This can't be legal. My cousin Julian, who had never worked a single day in his life, jumped over the table and pointed at the lawyer. This is fraud. I'm going to sue. Others followed. My family went from denial to rage in mere seconds. This is theft. He can't leave us with nothing. I will fight this in court. You manipulated him. You must have made him sign when he was already sick. The shouting was deafening. The lawyer raised a hand, calm amidst the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, the will is completely legal and was signed months ago with witnesses. You can try to challenge it, but you will lose. My father glared at me, his eyes burning with hatred. You're an ungrateful bastard. My aunt spat. I hope you enjoy your money because you no longer have a family. I just stood there, watching as they all despised me with a fury I had never seen before. Uncle Edmund was right. I was alone now. My cousin Julian kept his word. He sued. The trial dragged on for months, but the outcome was inevitable. He lost. The will was airtight, with no legal loopholes. But in the process, he burned through a fortune in legal fees and ended up drowning in debt. My father never spoke to me again. No one in the family did. To them, I had stolen what was rightfully theirs. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were nothing but vultures, preying on tragedy for their own gain. Sometimes, solitude is the price of freedom. And in my case, I'm glad to be rid of all those fake, greedy people. Do you have leech-like relatives like this? If so, share your story in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this, or even crazier ones, click on the suggested ones on the screen. Don't forget to subscribe, because Reddit is interesting.